Court is back in session. You may be seated.
Apologize for the little longer delay than over the lunch break. It's my fault. And this one is my fault too, but I take responsibility for it. Other times it's not. So, all right. I know we had talked about the one question that I was going to allow to be asked, and unless there's some objection, I will ask that question and explain to them that the other question is submitted would not be a problem. We're ready for the jury?
Yes, sir.
All right, bring the jury in. Well, hold on just a second. We've got the defendant. Now we're ready for the jury.
Yes, sir.
Recording in progress.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, before we broke for our dinner break, I was explaining to you there were a couple of questions. I've reviewed those questions on the record with the attorneys, and of those two questions, I'm going to ask the following. Officer Neese or Agent Neese, during the interview with the defendant, did you observe any actual tears from Mr. Wiggins?
I did not.
All right. The other question that was proposed by one of the jurors was a question that I felt like was not appropriate under the circumstances, so I declined to ask that. And as I've explained to you in our opening, don't ascribe any reason to that or try to intimate why that might be the case, but it's just my opinion that I'm not going to ask that question. So, all right. State, have anything further for Agent Neese?
No.
Defense have anything further?
No, Your Honor.
All right, then Agent Neese, you are allowed to step down. All right, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Dr. Feng Li.
All right, I will, and I'm going to instruct the media not to broadcast those photographs. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this next witness is the medical examiner who performed the autopsy. There are necessarily going to be photographs of that autopsy that are going to be allowed for your inspection. They have relevance to the issues in this case, so they're going to be allowed. Obviously, it's not something that anyone would necessarily want to review or look at, but I want to assure you that we're not asking you to do it except for the fact that it is very necessary. And for the media, I'm going to instruct the media not to display those photographs out of respect for the family. So you may photograph and video the doctor who is testifying and the questions being asked by General Sagi, but the photographs that will be displayed on the large thing, no one is to take a photograph or video of those photographs. Thank you.
You would stand right here, face the clerk, raise your right hand, be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give in this case be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do. Have a seat right there and try to speak directly into the microphone.
Hello, good evening, Dr. Li.
Good evening.
Could you please say your name for the court and spell it for the court reporter?
Feng Li, Fengli.
All right. And Dr. Li, while we start, first of all, what is your current employment position?
I'm currently the chief medical examiner for Metropolitan Nashville and Davidson County.
Okay. And Dr. Lee, if I could approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
I'm handing you a document. Do you recognize what that document is?
This is a copy of my CV.
Okay. And Dr. Lee, if you would please, could you give an explanation of your educational background to the jury?
Yes, I had my medical degree from China, graduate degree, PhD from University of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky. And I also had a law degree from Nashville School of Law. I had my residence training in anatomic and clinical pathology in Philadelphia. My fellowship training in forensic pathology, also in Philadelphia.
Okay. And Dr. Lee, could you please, for the jury, explain your work background as well?
Yes, I started my job in Nashville in July 2000 as an assistant medical examiner and moved up to senior and eventually right now as chief medical examiner.
And prior to working in the Davidson County Medical Examiner's Office, where were you employed?
I, mainly in the training, in PhD training, postdoctoral training, residency training, fellowship, and then, moved to Nashville.
Okay. And are you board certified?
Pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
Okay, thank you. And have you been previously rendered an expert in Tennessee courts?
Yes, in many counties.
Have you been rendered an expert in forensic pathology before?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we would like to tender Dr. Lee as an expert in forensic pathology.
Any objection? All right, Dr. Lee will be qualified as an expert for this court in forensic pathology.
And we'd like to move his CV as the state's next exhibit, please.
To 17.
Now, Dr. Lee, could you please explain what some of your job duties are at the medical examiner's office?
As a forensic pathologist, we are basically in charge for medical legal death investigation to determine the cause of death, manner of death in the cases of unusual, traumatic, suspicious, and other cases.
And part of your job when you conduct an autopsy, are you required to make a report?
Yes, that's as a part.
Okay. And did you have a chance to do an autopsy report, MEC 18-1477?
Yes, I did.
And Dr. Lee, I saw you pulled out a piece of paper. Do you have that autopsy report in front of you?
Yes.
Mr. Rutledge? Now, Dr. Lee, could you please look at the screen? Do you recognize what that is a document of?
Yes, this is a report of investigation by county medical examiner.
Okay. And can you scroll up, please, Mr. Etheridge? Is there a state number and a case number listed on this document?
Yes, the state number is 18-22-0044. Case number MEC 18-1477.
And is the MEC number how you all at the medical examiner's office refer to each individual autopsy?
Right. Each case came through our office will assign a unique and number for the case.
Okay. And at the top there, you see the name of a decedent. Who is the decedent in this autopsy?
You see the name is Daniel Scott Baker,
Okay. And how old was he?
32 years.
And then the other information that was there, is that background information that you all are given?
Yes, white male, date of birth April 23rd, 1986.
Okay. And then down at the narrative summary is that the initial report, information that you get prior to the autopsy?
Yes.
Okay. And at the bottom, there's jurisdiction ordered and toxicology ordered.
Yes.
And then if you could scroll down, please. You have what's listed on this sheet as cause of death and manner of death. Could you please explain to the jury what cause of death and manner of death are?
the cause of death is a disease or injury lead eventually to the person to pass away. For example, heart disease, gunshot wound, stab wound, and motor vehicle accident, blunt force injuries. Manner of death, in the state of Tennessee, there are 5 categories. One is natural, basically completed natural disease, as I described to you, like heart disease, lung cancers, completely natural event. Second is called accident. Basically mean like motor vehicle accident, drug overdose accidentally, and so on. Third category is called homicide. The person was killed by another person. Fourth category is called suicide, meaning the person killed himself. And the fifth category is called undetermined, meaning after the investigation, autopsy, lab studies, and other studies, we cannot come up how the person died, or more than one possibility how the person died. We say this is undetermined.
Okay. And in this case, is that you're finding that what the cause of death is? What is the cause of death in this case?
The cause of death is multiple gunshot wounds.
And the manner of death?
It's a homicide.
Okay, if you could please scroll to the next page. Now, Dr. Lee, this is a several-page report that goes through several different things. And what I'd like to do is walk you briefly through this and then have explain with photographs for all the different wounds.
Yes.
Could you please read the date and time, the date and time of the autopsy?
Date of time was May 31st, 2018 at 9:35 a.m.
Okay. And the date and time of death, is that something that you were given by another county coroner?
Officially pronounced by the county. It was May 30th, 2018 at 6:30 p.m.
Okay. So the autopsy in this case happened fairly quickly after?
Next morning, yes.
Okay. Thank you. If you could scroll down, please. And here we have pathological diagnoses. Could you just briefly explain what you have laid out here, and then we'll go into it a little bit more in depth.
Right. Basically, in this section, I listed all the major findings related to the victim.
Okay, and if we could scroll down, I believe that there are 6 gunshot wounds, is that correct?
There are a total of 6 gunshot wounds to the body.
Okay. And then you have what's listed as associated injuries. What would that category be?
Basically, sometimes if the gunshot wound to the same place, you cannot differentiate which, gunshot caused death, so I list them together as associated injuries. For example, the gunshot wound that go through the chest or heart or vessels cause blood accumulation in the chest cavity. So these are associated injuries. I list them blood in different areas, bruises, subgillic hemorrhage, so on.
Okay. And then there are another category, number 9 and number 10.
Number 8.
I'm sorry, 8, yes, of course.
Yeah, 8 meaning thermal injuries. Basically, the body was partially burned. And the number 9, other injuries, small abrasions. Basically, these are the skin scrapes against the rough surfaces.
Okay. And then there are other findings in the postmortem toxicology.
Right. Other findings in this case, because this victim was relatively young and relatively healthy, and not a lot of diseases other than some black spots on the lungs. Maybe breathing in the polluted air, maybe a smoker, and so on. And persistent fetal ablation, this is an incidental finding. Basically, the kidneys look like a child, and that's like incidental finding, not significant. And 11 listed indicates that we did a routinely toxicology studies, and we didn't detect alcohol or commonly used drugs.
And no carbon monoxide.
And no carbon monoxide because, we saw that the victim was burned, and sometimes we can use blood carbon monoxide level to indicate whether the person was alive when the fire started or the person had already passed away.
Okay. Now, Dr. Lee, the rest of this report is a much more in-depth description of the injuries. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if we could just scroll through briefly, because I'm going to walk you back through each of the injuries separately with photos. The external examination, could you explain kind of what your process is in an autopsy?
Right. Autopsy is a process or processes. Basically, you examine the outside of the body, document the clothing wearing, any trauma to outside of the body, any specific findings like a tattoo, scars, and so on. What is the weight of the body, length of the body, what color of the eyes and the teeth, and etc. So that's called external examination. After document exam the external of the body, then you do the internal examination. It's the same thing to document the exam, to document the disease and the trauma as I examined it.
Okay. Now, Dr. Lee, as we scroll down through this, kind of briefly, we'll start with what's listed as gunshot wound A. Mr. Etheridge, if you would please pull up the PowerPoint for Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee, I'm going to hand you a photograph, see if you recognize it.
So this photo depicts the case number of the case, basically.
Okay. And does it have identifying
Right.
name and...
MEC number 18-1477.
Okay. Your Honor, we would move this photo as state's next exhibit.
Exhibit 218.
All right, thank you. Now, doctor, if you would please, for the jury, we're going to go wound by wound. If you would please explain what gunshot wound A is.
Right. So first of all, let me also describe how we describe the gunshot wounds. If more than one gunshot wound, if there are more than 2, 3, a lot of times we just not necessarily in the order of importance, but according to the anatomical location. So gunshot wound A is on the left flank area, and there are 2 or 3 or sometimes more categories or classifications for the gunshot wounds. One is depend on how far the muzzle to the target, that's called a distance, and that's number 2 classification is whether the bullet is still inside of the body or not. So we'll say penetrating gunshot wound, meaning the bullet is still inside the body and we recovered. Perforating gunshot wound, meaning the bullet is through and through. Usually we don't recover, maybe at the scene, maybe other places. So these are the 2 general categories. So the gunshot wound A.
And Dr. Lee, I'm going to stop you
Yes.
so I can get an explanation of, you talked about muzzle distance.
Yes.
So could you please talk about the categorizations for distance?
Right. So I will just describe to you this. This is called a distance. So there are 3 categories among the distance between the gun and the target. One is called the close range. Close range meaning it's within a few inches. Sometimes contact, some near contact. That's called a close range. You will see the muzzle imprint if it is contact, or very close enough, some soot around or in the depth of the wound. That's called a close range. Second category is called intermediate range. The characteristic of the intermediate range is the powder tattooing. Sometimes they call this stippling. So basically, when the bullet was fired from the gun, the gas, the burned and unburned, these powders will come out together with the bullet. If it is close enough, they will mark the skin around the entrance wound. That's called a powder tattooing, embedded like a tattoo. So that's called intermediate range.
And doctor, how far are these ranges in distance?
So it varies from weapon to weapon and sometimes ammunition to ammunition, but as a rule of thumb for the jury to easily remember, we use like 2.5 feet to 3 feet. Within that range, you will see most of the time on the naked skin. But keep in mind that sometimes, the hair, the clothing, they will filter through, so you don't see it. That's called the intermediate range. And the next category is called distant. Distant meaning anything above 3 feet, whether it's 10 feet, 100 feet, to me, I would not be able to tell the difference. They are the same on the wound itself. So the gunshot wound A is distant, perforating gunshot wound, meaning that is beyond the 3 feet. Most likely, there's perforating meaning no bullet is recovered for this gunshot wound.
Okay. Now, doctor, let's also at this time discuss whether or not how your classification for fatal and severe is for a gunshot.
Right. So when I testify, I would usually say all the gunshot wounds are potentially fatal. Depends on where they hit, what organs injured, especially when it hit the brain, it hit the heart, it hit the major arteries. Usually it's a fatal. But sometimes at this time may not be fatal, but later as complications of the infection, as bleeding, as other things can still be fatal. Depends on other factors. For example, whether the victim was saved by medical personnel, by the hospital, by whatever. So potentially fatal on all gunshot wounds, depends on where they are and what other measures are taken. And usually I can tell or I can describe or compare multiple gunshot wounds, which one are most severe or less severe. I can, describe that.
Okay, so when we talk to you about each of these wounds, we'll classify them not necessarily as fatal, but severe and less severe. Is that fair?
Right.
Okay. All right. Now, you were discussing wound A going into the left flank. Could you explain the tracking and any sort of injuries?
Yes. So gunshot wound A is the left flank area. Flank is sometimes, in the side, on the left side, this bullet injures the left lung, the heart, ascending aorta. The aorta is basically the largest vessel in the body. It's the major vessel. And the right lung too. So the bullet exits through the right side of the chest. So that gunshot alone usually is fatal and very severe.
Okay. And when you examined this, where was the exit wound for this track?
On the right side of the chest. And the direction is from the left to right, from back to front, and from lower to up.
Okay. So, doctor, would that be from down here and up?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to hand you a picture. We'll see if you recognize that. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, this is a gunshot wound A entrance wound.
Okay. And doctor, are we looking at that down on the bottom? Is it the red area there that's been marked?
Right, there's a hole you can see. This is a gunshot wound entrance.
Okay. And are we to move that photo as the next exhibit?
219.
And doctor, do you recognize what that's a photo of?
Yes, again, this is the exit wound on the right side of the chest of the gunshot wound A.
Okay. And that's for the, you said this was a perforating wound, so there was no bullet recovery.
Right, if there's an exit wound, the bullet is usually gone, and I don't recover on this particular gunshot wound any projectile.
All right, thank you. Your Honor, we'd move that as exhibit number 220. that wound, what would you anticipate their ability to be to move, to walk, their expectancy?
So it depends on the, other factors too. Usually from the literature, even this devastating gunshot wound, people quoted in the literature that the person can still maybe walk, maybe run for a short period of time and short distance.
Would they still be able to then talk at the same time, maybe?
A little bit.
All right. All right. And we're going to go down to what was marked as gunshot wound B, please, in your description on the autopsy.
Yes, gunshot wound B is also called a distant, perforating / penetrating gunshot wound, also on the left flank area, in general area. So why is perforating? Why is / penetrating? Meaning this gunshot wound exit through the right side of the body and then re-enter on the other side and on the right upper arm. Then I recovered the bullet. So this is continuation. Gunshot wound, if it is this wound alone, it's called perforating, meaning it's already exited. But because I recovered the bullet, because the bullet just continue its way, and I recovered the bullet, it's called penetrating. So I recovered the bullet.
Okay. So basically, doctor, what I'm understanding from this is this bullet enters in one side, exits the other side, enters into the arm, and then stays in the arm.
Stayed in the arm, and I recovered the bullet. Yes.
I'm handing you a picture. Do you recognize that picture?
Yes.
And what is that a picture of?
So this is the wound on the left, flank area or chest area, whatever you call. You can see that the head is on the other side. The left arm is on the bottom.
And is this wound above the gunshot wound A? The
Yes.
gunshot wound A is down farther.
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, we would move this as the state's next exhibit, which would be 221. And doctor, I'm handing you another photo. Do you recognize what that's a photo of?
Yes. This is a picture describing the exit wound and the re-entering wound, but I will point it to you later. On the ruler, that's the exit wound. On the chest, you can see that the head is on the left side and the right arm is also on the right side, and this is the exit wound on the right side of the chest.
All right. Thank you, doctor. We move that photo as exhibit 222. Doctor, I'm going to hand you another photo. Do you recognize this photo?
Yes.
And what is this a photo of?
So this photo depicts when the other wound is exiting. This one basically is re-entering. You can see there are two holes, one on the right side of the chest and one on the right upper arm around this axilla area. You can see it. There's a defect that's called re-entering wound.
Okay, so to be clear, doctor, this is the exit wound from the other.
Yes, from,
And this is the entry wound to the next part.
yes.
Why don't we make that the state's next exhibit 223? And doctor, do you recognize this photo?
Yes.
And what is that a photo of?
So this photo shows there's a red area, and on the right upper arm, you can see the redness. That's the area where the bullet is. So when you cut the skin, you can recover the bullet.
Your Honor, we mark that as the state's next exhibit 224. And Dr. Lee, in this, did you recover the bullet from the arm of Daniel Baker?
Yes.
And do you recognize that photo?
Yes, this is the bullet I recovered from the right up arm.
Okay. Now, there's several photos here, Doctor. I believe this is the bullet in different angles, so we'll go through this pretty quickly. We mark this as 225, please. And do you recognize that photo, Doctor?
Is again different angles.
All right. We would mark that as 226. And do you recognize that?
Yes, it's another view.
And you're holding with calipers, is that correct?
Yeah, no, this is the pickup.
Okay.
Basically, this is a plastic pickup to show the different size, and the plastic pickup meaning you don't make a mark on the bullet itself, because if you make the mark on the bullet, use the metal tool, it will make the comparison more difficult. So usually we use plastic tool to avoid the markings on the bullet.
Now, Doctor, when you removed this bullet, did you notice anything about it? Do you classify the caliber of rounds or anything?
Usually, we classify it as a small caliber, medium caliber, and large caliber. And it's like a rough estimate, but the more accurate classification or more professional opinion will be done by the forensic ballistic expert, and they will use the weight and markings on the microscope to compare which gun fired the bullet. So these are markings like it's similar to fingerprints, unique to the gun.
Okay. Now, Doctor, did you have an opinion about whether this was a small caliber or a large caliber?
This is a large caliber.
And what do you classify as a large caliber?
Usually, small caliber is 22, 25. Medium caliber is, say, 49 millimeter. Anything above that usually called large caliber.
All right, thank you. And we moved that photo in, I believe, as 227. And Doctor, again, if you recognize that photo?
Yes, a different angle of the bullet and then missing a jacket.
Okay, thank you. We move that as
A piece of
220
jacket, yes.
228.
Again, different angle.
Okay, we move that in as 229, please. Now, Doctor, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the wound damages for gunshot wound B. Could you explain what organs that might have encountered and the severity of that?
Right. So this one entered in the left flank area and damaged the heart and the liver. And the bullet exits through the right side of the chest and re-enters into the arm.
And how would you classify this, a severe, non-severe?
This is a very severe and a fatal wound because it injures the heart.
Okay. And again, Doctor, if somebody had this injury, would you expect them to be able to move for a specific distance or still talk?
Probably a very short period of time and short distance.
Okay, thank you. Now, Doctor, we're going to move on to wound C. I'm going to hand you a photo. And I'm going to first ask you, before we go to any photos of it, to explain what wound C is.
This one is a D. If I, according to my report, so the C is the other wound.
I think are there not 3 on that picture, Doctor?
Yeah, there are 3 wounds on the face.
Okay.
Yes.
Could you explain wound C, and then we'll label them?
Okay. So gunshot wound, there are 3 gunshot wounds on this side of the face. Gunshot wound C is around the lips. It's the top, most of the top one. And gunshot wound D is next to the cheek. And gunshot wound E is around the ear.
Okay. We'd move that photo in as the next exhibit, which would be 230.
Yes, ma'am.
And doctor, I'm showing you a photo. Do you recognize what that photo is?
Yes.
What is that a photo of?
So this photo's close up a little bit, showing the 3 wounds on the same size of the face.
Okay, we'd move that as 231, please. And doctor, do you recognize what that's a photo of?
This photo shows that there are 2 wounds around the face or cheek on the
Yeah.
left side.
Which wound is which letter, doctor, on here?
So the wound closer to the lips is gunshot wound C.
So the top one is C?
Yes.
Okay. And which one is the bottom one?
Gunshot wound D.
Now, doctor, let's talk about the characteristics of gunshot wound C.
Gunshot wound C, you can see, as I described to you, of intermediate range. Characteristic is the powder tattooing, the small dots around the entrance wound. So you can see there are fine red dots around the entrance wound.
And what is the tracking of wound C?
Gunshot wound C is around left lips, and this wound track goes from left to the right, and from lower to up and back. So goes to the top of the head and and injure the brain.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to hand you another photo. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is the wound before we shave the wound. It's an exit wound on the top of the head.
Okay. And the previous picture, in case I haven't moved it in, with the photo 290 should be exhibit 232. And we'll move this one as exhibit 233. Now, doctor, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions about wound C as it tracks from the side of the face and it exits the top of the head. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could you explain how a bullet could do that kind of trajectory?
So there are multiple ways. So usually when I testify, I would ask, give me a scenario. What is the relative positions between the shooter and the victim? Because there are hundreds of positions can cause that. So I cannot predict the relative position between the shooter and the victim.
Okay. Now, you said that this injured the brain. Is
Yes.
that correct? Would this have been an instantaneous death?
Usually it's not instantaneous. When we describe instantaneous death, is usually the trauma injured the brainstem area. The brainstem is basically the command center for controlling the respiration, the heartbeat stuff. So if that brainstem is damaged, the person is dead right then, right there. Other injuries, we hear from news, from reports, people get shot in the head, brought to the hospital, did the surgery right away. Sometimes they can be saved. So that's not instantaneous death.
All right.
As this case is same thing. It's not instantaneous death.
I'm going to hand you one more photo. And doctor, do you recognize that photo?
So this photo shows that the exit wound when we shave the hair.
And that is perforating the skull, is that correct?
Yes, go through the top of the head.
And that was still gunshot wound C. We'd move this as State's Exhibit 234. And doctor, on wound C, did you give a range for that? Is that an intermediate?
Intermediate range, meaning within 2.5, maybe 3 feet at the most.
Okay. We'll move on to wound D and your description of wound D, please.
Yes, gunshot wound D is also described as intermediate range. Perforating gunshot wound on the left cheek. This one just going from left to right, from the back to the front, and a little bit upward through the mouth. And this one damages some teeth and damages the tongue, and the bullet exits through the corner of the right lip.
Now, doctor, we saw a previous photo, I think it was 230, which showed all 3 wounds on the head. I'm going to hand you a photo. Do you recognize what that is?
Right, this is the gunshot wound exit from the gunshot wound D.
And doctor, the entrance wound to that, was that the one near the up there where you kind of see the red on the cheek?
The other one,
The one a little bit farther up.
yeah, this one is called C, the other one is called D. So,
And did you have a range for this?
yes, as I described, again, this is also intermediate range, meaning within 2.5 feet, maybe 3 feet
Okay.
from the gun to the skin.
And you classified this as severe or less severe?
This is, among them, this is less severe compared to the other gunshot wounds.
Okay. And you said that it damaged the teeth?
Teeth
the
and tongue, yes.
All right. And we'll move on to wound E and your description of that, please.
Gunshot wound E is described as distant, perforating gunshot wound on the left cheek area. It's in front of the ear. And this one goes from left to right and from lower to up and a little bit forward and damage the head.
Okay. So that
The
I'm
brain,
clear. So that I'm
yes.
clear on this, Dr. Lee. This one enters up above the ear and out the other side. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to hand you a photo. Do you recognize that photo?
Yes.
And what's that a photo of?
So this is the one shows that the gunshot wound in front of the left ear.
And that is gunshot wound E's entrance.
Yes.
Okay. And do you have a distance for this one?
Right. This is described as distant, meaning above the 3 feet range.
Okay. And this again is a perforating.
Perforating, meaning I didn't recover the bullet for this gunshot wound.
Okay. And I'm going to hand you another photo. Oh, we've moved that one as the next exhibit.
235.
Thank you.
And this one will be 236.
So this gunshot wound is actually from the left cheek or in front of the left ear, and this is exit wound on the right forehead or right temporal area.
All right. Thank you, doctor. We moved that photo, I believe, as 237.
Yes, ma'am.
And doctor, you said that this gunshot wound E caused damage to the brain. Could you explain what that?
Right. This is also very devastating gunshot wound, potentially fatal gunshot wound because the brain was damaged.
Now, doctor, again, I'll ask. This is not this did not sever his spinal column. Is that correct?
Right. It's not like a gunshot wound instantaneous, but very severe, devastating.
So it's potentially he could still, if somebody with this sort of injury could still be, I don't want to say functioning, but could still be aware and alive.
Will be, say, still breathing, their heart beat without, any medical intervention for a very short period of time.
All right, thank you, doctor. We're going to move on to wound F. Could you describe wound F, please?
Gunshot wound F is described as distant, superficial, perforating gunshot wound on the right thumb. Basically, it's distant, meaning above 3 feet, and perforating. I didn't recover the bullet. It's through and through, and this is superficial and a very short distance from the entrance wound to the exit wound.
Okay, doctor, I'm going to hand you a photo. Do you recognize that photo?
Yes, this is the wound on the right thumb. You can see that the wound on the base of the right thumb.
We would mark this as State's Exhibit 238. And doctor, do you recognize that photo?
Yes, this is the exit wound from the gunshot wound on the right thumb. It's on the back of the right hand.
So doctor, just so that the jury understands that, if you could hold up your hand and just point to like how that tracking went.
From here to here, basically.
And is that a perforating wound?
Perforating and through and through.
And again, that's a distant wound?
Distant and through and through, yes.
And how did you classify this one? Severe, not severe?
This is, if I have to compare all the gunshot wounds together, this one is less severe.
Okay. Now, doctor, during the course of an autopsy, do you all take x-rays of the subject?
If, x-rays are taken for the cases involving the gun, involving the stab, involving decomposition, involving other special cases. For gunshot wound cases, we will routinely x-ray the victim to see if there's any bullet or not.
Okay. And I believe, Madam Clerk, the last photo we move in is 239. And do you recognize that, doctor?
Yes.
And what is that?
So this is a part of the x-ray of the body. You can see there's a very light spot on the right upper arm. That is the bullet I recovered. So you can see the head and the right arm, and there's a small pieces of metals in the right hand area we didn't recover because I don't want to damage more to the wound itself. And small pieces, it's usually hard to recover.
So doctor, this up here, that white area there,
Yes.
that is the bullet from gunshot wound B that was recovered?
That's the one, exit and re-enter in the arm and I recover, yes.
And the lighter area here, that would be I don't want to say like shrapnel, but
Small pieces of metal.
we moved this as the next State's Exhibit. I believe that's 240.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, doctor, in the autopsy, I'd like to go over your findings for what you had as other associated injuries.
Yes.
And could you describe what those other associated injuries were?
So because of the several gunshot wounds, I injured the head, so I put them together as like a subgilial hemorrhage, meaning the skin of the head, there are bleeding, and the skull fractures because of the bullets, and subdural hemorrhage, meaning blood inside the brain. There are several layers. It's like below the dura. There's a space and a small amount of subdural hemorrhage there. Subarachnoid hemorrhage, a little bit lower, another layer of the brain. And hemothorax is meaning the blood accumulated in the chest cavities. In the right chest with 400 cc of blood and blood clot. In the left chest, 600 cc of blood and blood clot. And some blood also inside the heart, about 60 cc of blood and blood clot. So these are the blood lost inside the body cavities.
Okay, thank you, doctor. I'm going to move on to the thermal injuries that you have documented. Could you please, for the jury, explain what a thermal injury is, and then discuss the different types of degrees of burns and how you categorize the percentage?
Yes. So thermal injuries for lay term is just the burn. It's easy to remember. So there are several important issues here. First of all, how deep? There are several degrees. First degree, second degree, third degree, sometimes even fourth degree. So first degree is very superficial, like a sunburn type of, you exposed to sun too much without a suntan lotion, you get a burn. That's called first. If it's long enough, maybe second. So generally it's first degree burn. Second degree is partial thickness of the skin burn and very painful. Third degree is the full thickness of the skin was damaged by whatever the reason, the heat, by fire, whatever. So these are the degrees. Fourth degree sometimes even burn beyond the skin, the bones, muscle exposure stuff. And how do you measure them, in terms of the percentage? So usually they will use 1% for the hand. And usually they will say rule of nines. And there are 11/9 plus 1%. So you measure that. And for upper extremity is about 9%, the whole thing. The front of the torso is about 18%. Back is about 18%. So you just calculate that. So in this case, it's about 10% of the body surface area with second degree to third degree burns.
Okay.
And also, if it is fire damage in the house fire and other car fire, if the person is alive, a lot of times you will see the soot breathing in the airways, and the blood carbon monoxide level will be high. So that might indicate the person was burned alive. If there's no soot, no carbon monoxide in the blood, in the closed area like a house fire, it means basically majority of the time the person is already dead when the fire started.
Okay. Now, actually, I'm going to ask you about that because you said in a house. Would that still apply to an automobile, like a closed area like that?
Closed area, yeah. If it's a fire in a closed area, in the house, in the car, yes.
Okay. I'm going to hand you a photo. We'll see if you recognize that. What is that a photo of?
Right, so the photo shows the right side of the body with the burn. So the skin changed, regular skin, you can see on the lower side is normal looking, but on the top of the other side is like a torso and the flank area and the back area. These are leathery type of color. So these are the, thermal injuries of burn.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. We moved that photo in as, I believe, 241. Yes, ma'am. And do another photo. Do you recognize that?
Yes, the same injuries. It's around the right buttock area.
So is this just down farther on the body?
Yes.
So there's two distinct areas that were burned on.
Actually, maybe continuation. It's from the torso all the way to the buttock area.
Okay, and you said those were second and third degree burns?
Yes.
All right, we would move that as State's Exhibit 242. Now, Doctor, you mentioned soot and carbon monoxide. And in this case, did you find any evidence of soot and carbon monoxide?
No soot or detectable carbon monoxide in the blood.
Okay. So what does that give you any indication about when this individual was set on fire before or after death?
Most likely, the person or the victim was already dead.
Thank you. And do you recognize what that's a photo of, Dr. Lee?
These are the clothing from the body and partially burned.
Now, at the medical examiner's office, do you all document the clothing and items when an individual comes in?
Yes, if, for the cases, we have more investigation to go. It's not like, we will document all the clothing if necessary.
And Dr. Lee, on here, do you see like a uniform shirt and pants and boots, socks, and underwear and an undershirt?
Yes,
And does the top shirt appear to be burned along with the next one and several pieces of clothing?
yes,
We would move that in as State's Exhibit 243. Just a minute. And Dr. Lee, do you recognize that photo?
yes, the different angles of the clothing, and
Is that the back? All of the clothing has been flipped over?
yes,
Okay. We move that as State's Exhibit 244. Now, Doctor, you mentioned a couple other things that were I think the best way to put this is non-contributory, non-impactful in death. The possible smoker, remnants of perhaps Mr. Baker being a smoker, and then some kidney issues. Did they contribute in any way to the death?
none.
Okay. And during your course of the investigation, did you also happen to photograph the hands of Sergeant Baker?
Yes, we will, document and photograph the important place.
Now, we would move, do you recognize, the last one, you recognize that. Do you recognize that photo, Doctor?
Yes, this is with the case number, yes.
Okay. And is that a close-up of a hand with what appears to be blue ink writing on it?
Yes,
And we'd move that as the next State's Exhibit.
245.
And that one as well. And Doctor, do you recognize that photo?
yes,
Is that the same hand?
same hand.
A little farther away. We'd move that as State's Exhibit 246. We'd also at this time move a copy of the autopsy in as evidence.
Autopsy report.
Yes, will be 247. Now, Dr. Lee, in this case, have you had an opportunity to review the body camera footage?
Yes,
Okay. I'm going to ask you a very specific question about that. Prior to the last shots, do you remember any sounds or what was going on?
yes, I remember that, seeing the video, examined the video several times, and I can still hear that victim had some agonal, breathing, and before that, some moaning, some shouting, and some movement of the body because associated with some noise.
Okay. And doctor, does that lead you to believe that Sergeant Baker was alive at that time if he's making noises?
Most likely, yes.
Okay. And then after those noises and he's on the ground, you hear the final shots,
Yes.
to the best of your mind. And at that point, doctor, does it appear at all that he's moving or would necessarily have the ability to be aware?
After the last shot or so, I hear a little bit of background of, the noise, probably associated with the move of the body, but it's very short period of time and not significant.
Okay. And while Daniel Baker is on the ground doing what you called agonal breaths, would he have any awareness?
Depends on when, the stage is. At the beginning, yes, and toward the end, probably very less likely.
Okay. In this case, based on your knowledge and experience, is it possible that prior to those shots, Daniel Baker was still aware, had some sort of awareness, either feeling or otherwise?
Yes, at the beginning of the video, he is still breathing, he is moaning, yes,
Okay. And that's prior to the final shots?
yes.
We'll pass the witness, John.
No questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lee, and I believe that concludes your testimony. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
State may call your next witness. You may. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to make clear one thing, and that is, at this point in time, this concludes all of our proof for today. We have some matters that we need to attend to, and tomorrow morning, we're probably going to want to, I know you really want to do that since you're from Knoxville area, but in any event, we will probably need you to be here about 10:30 rather than at 9 o'clock, so that we can deal with those issues that I need to deal on the record without you being in here. So if you will step out with the jurors, thank you for your attention. I would just remind you of my instructions every time, that is not to discuss this case, don't talk about anything you've seen, or just wait about thinking about this case until we get to the end. So if you'll step with the officers, then we'll arrange for your transport. All right, two things. First and foremost is I wanted to have a little extra time in the morning rather than have the jury here waiting. I'd rather deal with the things we need to deal with in the morning before they arrive. So we'll all need to be here at 9 o'clock as usual so that we can deal with those issues. I have given a checklist for any sort of special requests regarding the final charge. And from the defense, the only thing that I would point out is that the defense is not requesting facilitation or attempt on any counts. They're only requesting a lesser included charge of second-degree murder as a lesser included of both premeditated and felony murder. And they are also requesting an unauthorized use of a vehicle for count 4. And then there are no other lesser included offenses requested to be charged on any of the other counts. So I assume tomorrow morning we'll have the state's request for special instruction. I know you had filed one in particular. I'd rather just deal with them all at the same time. And that'll give us some time in the morning to go ahead and do what we need to do regarding the charge and the changes it might be. Ms. Lewis has twice now tried to get my attention to make sure that I've dealt with this.
This is from the defense side, not just printed.
We have received a special request for jury instruction from Mr. Hopkins, and I will consider that along with the others. I've not had a chance, obviously, to look at it, but we'll take a look at it tomorrow morning. The other thing is that we'll need to have that charge conference, but then after the state has concluded or made a decision about terminating or going ahead and resting your case, then we'll need to deal with whether or not the defense is intending to call any witnesses and put on any other proof, and also whether the defendant intends to testify. We'll need to do the Momont hearing. So for that reason, we'll adjourn for the day until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, when we will again resume and take up those matters before the jury returns at 10:30. Anything before we adjourn?
Yes, sir. Judge, on the charging checklist, I think we agree with the defense on the main counts, all the first 10 counts, and as far as the restriction of the lesser includes, we will agree with those.
If you would just come, either speak into that microphone or your table, just so we have a record of it, because it's, make sure it's clear. So the state is in agreement with the defense as to not requesting facilitation or attempt on any of the counts, and only requesting second degree as a lesser of premeditated and first felony. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct, Judge.
I guess it would help if I told you to speak into a microphone if I turned it on for you, wouldn't it? All right.
Judge, that is correct.
Much better. Let's do this. Because the charge itself is a laborious and tedious procedure for us to get through, but it's also, extremely important. When we adjourn for the day, if you could meet with Ms. Jones for just briefly to let her go over with you that checklist and see if we can anticipate at least some of those things, then we can go ahead and do a rough draft, even if we have to then make revisions to it tomorrow morning. And I know it's been a long day for everyone, but I would like to try to get as much of that done tonight if we can, so that it can be ready as soon as we are concluded with our proof. So if you don't mind, when I adjourn, let's just let you talk with her for a moment so that she's helping with us with the charge, and we'll go from there. Anything else? All right, then we will adjourn until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So.